Albert Calloway did not come back. What remained was a watch, brass case, cracked crystal, the hands fixed in place. It was recovered at a survey camp near Anchor Gap, in the Ruby Mountains, within the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest. The tent was standing. The bedroll folded, the instrument set on its tripod. No note, no tracks, no body. The watch had stopped. It had been wound that morning. It had not broken. It had not fallen far. The hands pointed to 2:17. In later years, other recoveries in the same pass would record the same detail. Different owners, different decades, the same time. There is no finding that accounts for it. The record ends there. In the northeastern corner of Nevada, where the Ruby Mountains meet the edge of the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest, there is a stretch of terrain that appears on most maps as little more than contour lines and elevation markers. The land rises sharply here, climbing from sagebrush valleys into ridges of limestone and granite that cut across the sky in jagged silhouettes. This is not wilderness in the soft, inviting sense. It is remote in the way that isolates sound, in the way that makes distances deceive. The nearest town, a scattering of buildings along Route 228, sits 43 miles to the south. There are no paved roads into the high country, no cell service, no reason for most people to go there at all. In summer, the peaks remain cool, but the valleys bake under a relentless sun. In winter, snow drifts pile against the northern faces of ridges and stay there until April. The pass itself, known locally as Anchor Gap, runs between two unnamed summits at an elevation of just over 9,000 feet. It was used briefly by miners in the 1880s, then forgotten. By the 1930s, it existed only as a footnote in surveying records and county assessments. It was during this period, the mid-1930s, that the United States Geological Survey began a project to remap portions of the Ruby Range for updated topographical charts. The work was slow, the terrain was difficult, and the men assigned to it often worked alone for days at a time. One of those men was a surveyor named Albert Gebery Calloway. His personnel file, still kept in the archives of the Department of the Interior, lists him as 31 years old at the time of his assignment, unmarried, previously employed on railroad surveys in Montana and Wyoming. He was described by a supervisor as thorough, punctual, and unbothered by solitude. In June of 1936, Calloway was dispatched to complete a series of elevation readings and triangulation points along the ridgeline above Anchor Gap. He was expected to remain in the field for 2 weeks. He carried standard-issue equipment, a transit theodolite, measuring chains, a notebook, provisions, and a canvas tent. He also carried a pocket watch. It was a Waltham model, brass casing, with his initials engraved on the back. His brother had given it to him before he left for the West. According to later testimony, Calloway wound it every morning without fail. He did not return after 2 weeks. A search party was organized on July 3rd. They found his camp 3 days later, still standing less than half a mile from the pass. The tent had not collapsed. His bedroll was inside, neatly folded. His provisions were mostly untouched. The theodolite was set up on its tripod, facing east, as though he had simply stepped away mid-measurement. There was no sign of injury, no sign of struggle, no note, and his notebook was missing. They did find the watch. It was lying in the dirt near the edge of camp, face down, the crystal cracked. When they turned it over, the hands had stopped. Both pointed to 2:17. The search continued for another week, expanding into the surrounding draws and ridgelines, but no further trace of Albert Calloway was ever found. The case was eventually listed as a disappearance due to unknown causes, possibly related to a fall or exposure, though no body was recovered. The watch was sent to his family in Ohio. It remained there, stored in a wooden box, until 1981, when Calloway's niece donated it to a small historical society in Elko, Nevada. It was displayed briefly, then moved into storage. That might have been the end of it. But in the decades following Calloway's disappearance, Anchor Gap became associated with something else, a pattern. Between 1936 and 1979, at least 6 other individuals went missing in the area surrounding the pass. Not all at once, not in any regular interval, but enough to be noted in county records, in ranger logs, in the margins of search and rescue reports. A miner in 1942, a geologist in 1953, a sheep herder in 1961, 2 hikers in 1968, a forestry contractor in 1979. The circumstances varied. Some were found, some were not. But in 3 of those cases, personal effects were recovered near the site of disappearance. And in each of those 3 cases, a timepiece was found, stopped at the same moment. 2:17. June 9, 1936, 6:45 a.m. Weather clear, temperature approximately 48 degrees Celsius at camp elevation. Departed base at first light to complete transit line across northern face of ridge. Slope moderate but unstable in places. Loose shale over bedrock. Visibility excellent. No wind. Established benchmark at Station 4 by 9:30 a.m. Readings consistent with previous day's work. Terrain matches the county plats, though some drainages are mismarked on the older maps. Returned to camp by early afternoon. Resupplied water from the spring below the saddle. Flow still strong despite the season. Routine work. No complications. We'll push further east tomorrow to finish the upper traverse before weather changes. Reserves, June 11, 1936, 7:10 a.m. Weather clear again, colder than expected overnight. Frost on the 10th this morning, though it burned off quickly. Left camp just after dawn, followed the ridgeline east toward the secondary peak. Reached Station 6 by mid-morning, set up the theodolite on a flat shelf of rock overlooking the gap. While adjusting the instrument, I noticed something unusual on the opposite slope. There was a reflection, brief but distinct, coming from a point roughly 200 yards across the draw. At first I assumed it was water, a seep perhaps, catching the light. But the angle was wrong, and when I looked again, it was gone. I glassed the area with the field scope for several minutes. Saw nothing, likely a vein of quartz or mica in the stone, common enough in this formation. Still, it gave me pause. The area was entirely still, no birds, no insects. I've worked in quiet places before, but this felt different. Not oppressive, just absent. I finished the readings and packed up earlier than planned. Returned to camp by 3:00 p.m. The watch stopped working sometime this afternoon. I wound it this morning, as always, but when I checked it just now, the hands had frozen, both pointing to 2:17. I've tried winding it again. The mechanism turns, but the hands don't move. I'll need to have it looked at when I return to town. For now, I'm relying on the position of the sun. It's still light. I estimate another 3 hours until dusk. I'll stay in camp tonight and assess in the morning. Something feels off. I can't explain it better than that. June 12, 1936, 6:20 a.m. Slept poorly, woke several times during the night, though I'm not sure why. The air was still, no wind, no animal sounds. When I stepped outside at dawn, the camp looked exactly as I'd left it. But the theodolite had been moved, not knocked over, not disturbed by wind or wildlife, just repositioned. It now faced west toward the gap, instead of east where I'd left it the evening before. The legs of the tripod were still planted firmly. The instrument was level. Someone would have had to deliberately adjust it. I am alone here. I checked the surrounding area for tracks, found nothing conclusive. The ground is too rocky to hold prints well. It's possible I moved it myself last night and don't recall. I was tired, distracted by the watch malfunction, but I don't believe that. I've repacked my gear. I'm leaving this morning. The traverse is incomplete, but I can return with another crew to finish the work. I'll follow the ridgeline south, back toward the trailhead. I estimate 6 hours of walking if the weather holds. I'm writing this now, at 7:35 a.m. by the sun's position, before I break camp. If something happens, if I don't make it back, this notebook should explain where I was and what I observed. I don't know what else to say. The watch is still frozen at 2:17. That was the last entry. The notebook was discovered in 1998, more than 60 years after Callaway disappeared. It was found by a pair of forestry workers clearing deadfall near Anchor Gap, wedged into a crevice beneath an overhang roughly 3/4 of a mile from where his camp had been. The pages were brittle, stained by water and time, but still legible. The notebook was turned over to the Elko County Sheriff's Office, then forwarded to the Historical Society that already held Callaway's watch. A handwriting analyst confirmed the entries were consistent with other known samples of Callaway's writing. There were no additional pages, no further clues. The location where the notebook was found did not align with any logical route between his camp and the trailhead. If he had been attempting to leave the area, he was moving in the wrong direction. The official explanation, both in 1936 and in the years following the notebook's recovery, has remained largely the same. Albert Calloway likely became disoriented. The Ruby Mountains, despite their manageable elevation, are known for sudden weather shifts and treacherous footing. A person moving quickly, without proper navigation tools, can lose their bearings within minutes. Hypothermia can occur even in summer at high elevations, particularly at night. One of the lesser-known effects of mild hypothermia is paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where the victim, confused and overheating due to miscommunication in the brain's temperature regulation, removes clothing and behaves irrationally. Another effect is terminal burrowing, the instinct to seek shelter in small, enclosed spaces. This could explain why Calloway's remains were never found. If he crawled into a deep crevice or beneath a rockfall, his body may have been concealed naturally, beyond the reach of search parties. It could also explain the notebook's location. As for the watch stopping at 2:17, mechanical timepieces of that era were delicate. A sudden impact, a fall, a stumble, even placing it down too hard on a rock, could jam the internal gears. Pocket watches were not designed for rugged fieldwork. They were prone to failure. The fact that the hands stopped at a specific time is not, in itself, unusual. Every stopped watch shows a specific time. The theodolite being moved could be attributed to memory error or fatigue. Calloway admitted in his final entry that he had slept poorly and was distracted. It is also possible that an animal, despite leaving no obvious tracks, brushed against the tripod during the night. Even a minor disturbance could shift the instrument if the ground had settled unevenly. Confirmation bias, the human tendency to notice patterns where none exist, may have led Calloway to interpret a mundane event as something more significant. Stress and isolation amplify this effect. The reflection he observed on the opposite slope was almost certainly geological. Mica, selenite, and certain quartz formations are common in the Ruby Range. They catch sunlight at sharp angles and can appear suddenly, then vanish as the viewer's position shifts. Miners and surveyors in the 19th century referred to these as false signals, believing at times they were seeing lanterns or markers left by other workers. In reality, it was only stone. The absence of birds and insects, which Calloway noted, is also explainable. Certain atmospheric conditions, low pressure systems, temperature inversions, or even the position of the sun, can temporarily suppress animal activity. It creates an eerie silence, but it is not supernatural. It is weather. The other disappearances in the area, spread across 4 decades, are tragic but statistically unremarkable for a remote mountain region. Wilderness areas across the American West see dozens of missing person cases each year. Many are never resolved. The Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest alone encompasses more than 6 million acres. Much of it is rugged, unpatrolled, and unforgiving. People get lost, equipment fails, accidents happen. The fact that 3 other timepieces were found, stopped at 2:17, is harder to dismiss outright, but not impossible. Confirmation bias applies here as well. Search and rescue teams, aware of Calloway's case, may have been more likely to note and report the time on any recovered watch, particularly if it matched. Other watches, stopped at different times, may have been found and simply not recorded with the same attention. There is also the possibility of coincidence. 2:17 is not a mystical number. It is simply 2 hours and 17 minutes past noon or midnight. In a sample size of dozens of missing persons over decades, occasional repetition is mathematically inevitable. And yet, there is one detail that resists easy explanation. In 1968, when the 2 hikers went missing near Anchor Gap, a search team recovered a wristwatch from the site. It had stopped at 2:17, but the watch was still running when it was found. The second hand was caught, ticking against the minute hand, unable to advance. The team noted that the watch appeared to be trying to move forward, but could not. It remained frozen at 2:17, even as the mechanism continued to function. A jeweler in Elko examined it later. He found no damage to the gears, no internal obstruction. He cleaned and oiled the movement, then reset the hands. The watch functioned normally after that, but he could not explain why it had jammed at that specific time, or why the mechanism had continued running while the hands stayed fixed. His report, filed with the county in 1969, contains a single handwritten note in the margin. It reads, "Movement sound, no cause found." The watch from 1968 was returned to the family of one of the hikers. It is not part of the Historical Society's collection. Efforts to locate it in recent years have been unsuccessful. There is no conclusion here, no answer that fits all the pieces. Albert Calloway disappeared in 1936. His camp was intact. His notebook was found 60 years later in a location that made no sense. His watch stopped at 2:17. 3 other timepieces, recovered across 4 decades, stopped at the same moment. One of them was still trying to move. Anchor Gap remains as it was, remote, silent, marked only by elevation lines on maps that few people read. The past does not attract hikers. It holds no historical markers. There are no memorials to those who vanished there. It is simply a feature of the landscape. But the watch is still in Elko, brass casing, cracked crystal, hands frozen in place. An object recovered from a place where time, for reasons no one has adequately explained, seems to have stopped. Not forever, just at 2:17. The archive does not provide answers. It only preserves what was left behind. And sometimes, what was left behind refuses to be explained. The Anchor Gap file is closed, but the archive remains open. Subscribe to access the next entry.